I'm Ewan, welcome back to the Shoogly shed for part 2 on doing the petrol tank. Today I am going to prime the tank, do a sort of guide coat on it, and then do some sanding and a little bit more filling probably. The purpose of a guide coat is you spray a layer of primer or something similar, and then you sand back, and you basically want to sand that layer off, and in doing so it reveals high and low spots in the tank. Because those are the parts that will take longer to sand or will perhaps not sand as smoothly. And then you get filler, fill those parts, sand it, and then do your final priming before it gets painted. Okay, so the tank has pretty much dried. That guide primer layer has dried nicely. I can actually see, interestingly enough, don't know if you can see it, there's a wee low point there already. And when I sand, that'll be really obvious, so I'm going to dot a wee bit of filler on there. There's also a bit that I filled here that was a low point that I think is still a little on the low side, so I'm going to dot a wee bit of filler on there as well. Aside from that, I think we are very close, very close. The main bulk of the filler work has come up quite nicely. There's a few little pop marks in the filler. Not really sure why that's happened, but I'll do a wee skim of filler over these and smooth that off anyway. But aside from that, as a guide coat, that looks brilliant. So I'm gonna get my filler out, put the filler on, and then start sanding again. So the filler has now dried, that's rock solid. Like I say, it's 2 parts, so it hardens pretty quickly. But I left it for a couple of hours just to really solidify. The next thing to do is just give this a final rub down with some really fine grit sandpapers, the whole tank and also these bits, just to blend them into the rest of it before it gets more primer. Sanding that guide coat, you can kind of see it all kind of goes a bit blotchy, but essentially you know when you've reached the metal, but you also know when you've reached the primer layer, so you've kind of gone through what you need to, but not too much, if that makes sense. So like I say, it all looks pretty blotchy on camera, but really is so silky smooth to feel with your finger, so that's a good result. Next job really is to spray it with more primer, and then it'll need another wee rub down before it gets any sort of top coats. The primer I'm going to use is a high build primer, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. So what do I mean by high build primer? So this is like the grey stuff, it's another primer, however it's high build, so essentially it means that it's got a little bit of a sort of filling element to it, and when you're spraying it, it sits a little bit thicker than most primers or paints, and it can just smooth out little imperfections like little sanding marks or just little transitions between the filler and the metal that I maybe haven't got perfect or 100% perfect. It's a little bit of a safety net, I think, for me, because I am not, like I say, I'm not a body technician, so this kind of will just be my saving grace, I think, if it works the way it should. So that's probably going to go on next. Rain kind of stopped play a little bit, so I came up with this. My spray booth. Cheap and cheerful, right? It's inside, it's out the rain, and actually it probably will also minimise dust and things like that getting in my paint. So, win-win. Anyway, that's the first coat of the high build primer on. I'll need to leave it to dry for sort of 15-20 minutes before I do any more coats. You can just see the filler work through it, but it's just because it's sort of drying quicker on the filler than it is on the metal. But aside from that, having a look down the lines and the contours and stuff, I'm really happy with that. Super smooth. So I think that's been a a success, all that filler work. Thank God, because it was a total bollock. Alright, it is about 4 days since I filmed myself spraying that primer, and in the meantime I have had a total nightmare sanding and re-spraying and sanding and filling and re-spraying to get this tank to get where I want it to be. You know, I didn't want to settle for a half decent job. I wanted to actually, you know, get it as close to perfect as I can, and I think I'm there now. It's been a long road, but I think I'm there. The primer coat is pretty glossy smooth. It's been keyed nicely, so it should take the paint well. And all the filler work I've done has been pretty well blended, or at least as well blended as I'm ever going to get. You kind of forget that jobs like this are an apprenticed profession. You know, people train for a long time to be able to do these jobs, you know, to a very high standard. So I am at a level where I am happy that I can't do any better. So can't ask for much more than that, really. So today, colour is going on. When I say colour, we're going for black. I'm going to spray black paint and then let it dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'm going to spray a clear coat on it. The clear coat I'm going to use is a 2K clear coat, so it's one of the ones you have to activate the can. It's the kind of stuff that professional spray painters use in their spray guns, but it comes in a can. One thing to point out about 2K clear coats is that they are very toxic. They contain the isocyanate or something like that in the hardener, which can give you like really bad sort of lung conditions, things like isocyanate, asthma and that kind of thing. So a breathing apparatus is really important, and also wear overalls and gloves because it can be absorbed through your skin as well. So, you know, pretty toxic stuff, but it is a million times better than the regular lacquers and clear coats you get out of auto shops, because it has got that hardener in it, so it really does create a solid hard wearing finish. It's the kind of thing that comes stock on your tank when you buy a bike, and it's fuel proof, which is a huge you know, important thing to have on a petrol tank. So many times I've sprayed tanks with regular lacquer and then gone to fill up, and a couple of splashes of petrol have hit it and it's just like dissolved it. No matter how well cured it is, it just dissolves it with, you know, if you don't wipe it off within 10 seconds, it goes straight through the paint. And it's just, you know, you don't have to put all this hard work into spraying a tank and then have it ruined by something as silly as that. Anyway, let's get on with spraying. So that is all the coats of black done now. It's looking pretty good. There's a couple of tiny specks of dust in it, but it's just, I think, in the top layer, and this will be getting rubbed down with like 2000 grit for the final clear coat. So that will probably, well, that'll lift out any little imperfections like that. But as far as spraying a coat of black paint in the world's shoddiest spray booth, not a bad job. The tricky thing about black is that it shows up pretty much any imperfection in the bodywork. It's one of these things that, like I said earlier, to get this absolutely perfect, I'd have to have multiple attempts at it, and also just better facilities, you know, proper sanding equipment and proper spray booths and things like that for spraying good coats of black. It's not an easy thing to do. So I am 95% happy with the job I've done. So hey, you can't ask for a hell of a lot more. it finished, I think. It might need a wee polish, but aside from that, clear coat went down really nicely. I was really impressed with how that 2K stuff sprayed. It's the first time I used it, and I'll definitely be using that again in the future. Highly recommended. Anyway, as usual, please do give this video a like, leave me a comment, and do subscribe to the Shoogly Shed Motors YouTube channel. That would be awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you. Goodbye!
Got a little bit of a sort of filling element to it, and when you're spraying